I woke up to the aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifting through the house. Sunlight filtered in through the curtains, casting a soft, golden light across the room. I stretched out in bed, feeling the comfort of the sheets against my skin, and let the familiar sounds of home fill my ears. From downstairs, I could hear the quiet clinking of dishes and the joyful laughter of my 8-year-old daughter, Emma. Smiling to myself, I got up, slipped on my robe, and thought about how lucky I was to have my little family. As I made my way down the stairs, I spotted Laura, my wife, standing at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. When she noticed me, she looked up with a warm smile, her eyes crinkling at the corners like they always did. "Morning, sleepyhead," she greeted, handing me a mug. "I made your favorite French roast." "Thanks, babe," I said, taking a sip and savoring the rich taste. "Where's Emma?" "She's in the living room watching cartoons," Laura replied, nodding toward the other room. "She's been up for quite a while." I walked into the living room and saw Emma sitting cross-legged on the floor, completely focused on the TV. As soon as she heard me, her face lit up with excitement, and she sprang to her feet. "Daddy!" she squealed, running over to hug me tight. "Look, it's my favorite show," I chuckled, ruffling her hair and pressing a kiss on top of her head. "I see that, sweetheart. You having a good morning?" "Yes, Mommy made pancakes, and I got to put extra syrup on mine," she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with joy. I laughed again and headed back into the kitchen, where Laura was flipping through the newspaper. I leaned against the counter, taking another long sip of my coffee. "Everything all right?" I asked, noticing a slight frown on her face. "Yeah, just some stuff at work," she said, brushing it off with a wave of her hand. "Nothing you need to worry about." I nodded, trusting her words. Laura was always the calm one, always in control. It was something I really admired about her. The rest of the morning flew by in a blur of laughter and good conversation. We enjoyed a relaxed breakfast together, chatting about our plans for the day and simply enjoying each other's company. It was one of those mornings that felt so perfect, you wish you could capture it and hold on to it forever. But as the day wore on, I couldn't shake this odd feeling gnawing at me. It was like a distant storm cloud, barely visible but there nonetheless, hovering on the edge of my mind. I tried to ignore it, to push it away, but it clung to me, casting a shadow over my thoughts. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message that made my heart stop. I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over, not fully believing what I was seeing. "Laura," I called out, my voice shaky. She glanced up from her book, her expression calm and composed. "Yes, honey? We need to talk," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. Her eyes widened in concern, and she slowly set the book aside. "What is it, David? What's going on?" Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I finally spoke. "I got a message. It's about you." Her face drained of color, and in that instant, she seemed like a stranger to me. "What kind of message?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. "It's about you and someone else," I said, my voice cracking. Tears filled her eyes, and she shook her head, starting to speak. "David, let me explain." I cut her off, raising my hand. "Just tell me the truth, Laura," I pleaded, my heart breaking. "Please." And in that moment, everything changed. The perfect morning shattered like a fragile piece of glass, and that looming storm I'd sensed finally hit with full force. The truth was a bitter pill to swallow after her confession. For days, I felt like I was moving through life in a fog, struggling to grasp the reality of what had happened. The life I thought I knew was crumbling around me, and I had to start figuring out how deep the cracks went. Over the next few days, I began putting the pieces together, starting with the small things I had ignored for too long. The late nights at the office, the hushed phone calls, and her sudden need for space. One evening, after putting Emma to bed, I sat down with Laura in the living room. The silence between us was thick, heavy with everything left unspoken. I finally broke it. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though the pain was clear. She glanced up from her book, her eyes looking tired. I know, David. We do. How long has this been going on? I asked, struggling to stay calm. With a sigh, she set her book aside, folding her hands in her lap. A few months. It started as just a friendship, but then it became more. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my chest tightening. Why lie to me? Laura looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I was scared, David. I didn't know what it would do to us, to Emma. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt me? I repeated, my voice rising despite myself. Do you even realize how much this is tearing me apart? She winced, tears gathering in her eyes. I'm so sorry, David. I never meant for things to go this far. I took a deep breath, trying to clear my head. Who is he? His name is Ryan, she said quietly. He's a lawyer. We met at a work event. A lawyer, of course. Someone successful, charming. Everything I'm not, right? I said, feeling a wave of anger but pushing it down, trying to stay composed. I needed to understand. Does Emma know? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Laura shook her head. No, she doesn't. As far as she knows, we're just friends. I didn't want to confuse her. I nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. At least Emma was still in the dark, for now. But the thought of her being dragged into this mess made my heart ache even more. I need to know everything, I said firmly. No more lies. She nodded, wiping away the tears that had started to fall. Okay, David, I'll tell you everything. And she did. She told me about the lunches, the late-night calls, the weekends she claimed she was working but was actually spending with him. Each word cut into me, deeper and deeper. As she spoke, I felt a storm of emotions. Anger, betrayal, sadness. But under all that, there was a strange sense of relief. At least now I knew the truth. At least now I could start figuring out what to do next. That night I couldn't sleep. I just lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation in my head over and over. How could I have been so blind? How did I miss all the signs? The next day, I made a decision. I needed to confront Ryan, to look him in the eye and understand what made him think he could come into my life like this. I called in a favor from a friend who worked in the legal field to get his contact information. Then, I got in my car and drove to his office, gripping the steering wheel tightly the whole way. When I arrived, I walked in, doing my best to keep my cool. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. Can I help you? She asked. I'm here to see Ryan, I said, my voice firm. Tell him David is here. She nodded and made a quick phone call. A few moments later, a tall, well-dressed man appeared, Ryan. His face showed brief surprise, but he quickly covered it with a professional smile. David, I assume, he said, extending his hand. I ignored his outstretched hand, staring him directly in the eyes. We need to talk. He nodded, motioning for me to follow him to his office. Once inside, I closed the door behind me. I know about you and Laura, I said, cutting right to the chase. Ryan's expression stayed calm, but I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. I figured you might, he said softly. David, I never wanted to hurt you. Well, you did, I said, my voice shaking with barely contained anger. What do you think you're doing with my wife? It's complicated, he replied, running a hand through his hair. Neither of us planned for this. It just happened. That's not good enough, I snapped, leaning in closer. She's my wife, Ryan. We have a daughter together. He sighed, looking genuinely remorseful. I know, David, and I'm sorry, but Laura and we share a connection. A connection? I scoffed, barely able to keep my composure. Do you even understand what this is doing to our family? Ryan looked down, his shoulders sagging. I do, and I truly am sorry, but Laura deserves to be happy, and if being with me makes her happy, then that's how it is. I felt a surge of rage, but I forced myself to stay calm. I'm not giving up on my family without a fight, I said firmly. This isn't over. With that, I turned and walked out of his office, my mind spinning. There was a lot I needed to think through, and even more I needed to fight for. The day after I confronted Ryan, the tension in our house was so thick it felt like the air itself had turned heavy. Every glance Laura and I shared was loaded with unspoken thoughts, like we were both tiptoeing around the inevitable. Thankfully, Emma was blissfully unaware, keeping herself busy with her toys and schoolwork, as if nothing had changed. I knew I couldn't let this situation linger. We needed to sit down and have an honest conversation, to lay everything out in the open. That evening, after we put Emma to bed, I found Laura sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the television. "Laura, we need to talk," I said, standing in the doorway, my voice firmer than I felt inside. She muted the TV and looked up at me, her expression a mix of fear and resignation. "I know," she whispered. "Let's talk." I sat across from her, taking a deep breath to steady myself. "I went to see Ryan yesterday," I started. Her eyes widened in shock. "You did? What did he say?" "He told me what you already had," I replied, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "But this isn't about him. This is about us. Why did you feel the need to go to someone else?" She sighed heavily, running a hand through her hair, clearly struggling to find the right words. "David, it wasn't something I planned. I didn't just wake up one morning and decide to have an affair. It just happened." "But why?" I asked again, my voice thick with emotion. What was missing? What did I do wrong? Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked down, avoiding my gaze. "It's not like that, David. It wasn't about you. It was about me. I felt lost for a long time, like I was just going through the motions. Ryan made me feel alive again." Her words cut deep, but I tried to stay composed. "So, you were feeling lost, and instead of coming to me, you turned to someone else?" She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know it was wrong, David. I know I hurt you, but I was scared. Scared that you wouldn't understand or that you wouldn't even care." "Laura, I love you," I said, my voice cracking. "I care more than anything. If you had come to me, we could have worked through this together." She finally looked up, her eyes searching mine. "Do you really think we can fix this, after everything that's happened?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice softening. "But I'm willing to try if you are. For us, for Emma." Laura nodded slowly, wiping her eyes again. "I want to try too, but it's not going to be easy." "No, it won't," I agreed. "But we owe it to ourselves to at least try." For a few moments, we sat in silence, the weight of everything we'd said settling between us. Then I spoke again. "There's one more thing," I said carefully. "I can't just act like nothing's happened. I need time to process all of this, to heal. We both do." Laura nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I understand. I'll give you all the time you need." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of awkward moments and cautious steps toward rebuilding. We started going to counseling, having difficult conversations, and slowly, very slowly, trying to restore some semblance of trust. It was painful, and there were days when it felt impossible, but we were both committed to the process. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching Emma play in the yard, Laura turned to me. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" I asked, caught off guard. "For giving us a second chance," she replied. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful." I took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "We're in this together, Laura. We'll figure it out." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the house, I felt a flicker of hope. The storm hadn't passed, not by a long shot, but we were facing it together. For the first time in a long while, it felt like we might just make it through. The days that followed were filled with tension and uncomfortable attempts at normalcy. Laura and I were doing our best to rebuild what had been broken, but the wounds were still fresh, and it showed. Emma, sensing the strain between us, clung to us more than usual. Her innocent questions, though well-meaning, cut deep, reminding us of how fragile everything had become. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, Laura and I found ourselves sitting in the living room, pretending to watch TV. Emma had already gone to bed, her soft snores barely audible from upstairs. I turned to Laura, knowing it was time to have another difficult conversation. "Laura, we need to talk about what comes next," I said quietly. She muted the TV and faced me, her eyes tired and worn. "What do you mean? About us? About Emma?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't keep living like this, stuck in this in-between. We need a plan," I replied, trying to stay calm. Laura slowly nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about it too. Maybe we need some time apart. A break to figure things out." My heart sank. "A break? What about Emma? She needs both of us." "We'll explain it to her the best we can," Laura said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I think some space might help us see things more clearly." I wanted to argue, to plead with her to stay, but deep down, I knew she had a point. Maybe some distance would give us both the clarity we needed. We spent the next hour going over logistics, trying to keep the conversation as calm and rational as possible, though it felt anything but that inside. The next morning, I woke to an unsettling silence. The house was eerily still. I checked Emma's room, expecting her to still be asleep, but her bed was empty. A surge of panic rushed through me as I called out for her. "Emma!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the quiet house, but there was no response. I ran to the living room, and there, on the coffee table, was a note. My hands shook as I picked it up and began reading. "David, I'm sorry, but I had to leave. Emma and I are staying at my mother's for a while. We both need some space. I'll call you later to explain. Laura." A cold wave of dread hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a break. It felt like she was running away. I grabbed my phone and immediately dialed Laura's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Desperation clawed at me as I tried calling her mother's house, but there was no answer there either. Panicked, I called the police, my voice shaky as I explained what had happened. They reassured me they'd look into it, but I knew this wasn't an abduction. Laura had taken Emma, and legally she had every right to do so. The next few hours were a nightmare. I paced back and forth through the house, waiting for the phone to ring, but it never did. I called friends, family, anyone who might know where Laura had gone, but no one had any answers. It felt like they had both disappeared into thin air. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart raced as I opened it. "Daddy, Mommy, and I are at Grandma's. We needed a little trip. I miss you. Love, Emma." Tears blurred my vision as I read her words. At least I knew she was safe, but the thought of not seeing her, not holding her, was unbearable. I quickly typed a response, doing my best to keep it upbeat. "I miss you too, sweetheart. Be good for Mommy and Grandma. I'll see you soon. Love, Daddy." Days blurred into weeks, and still, I heard nothing from Laura. I tried to keep myself busy, burying myself in work, making sure the house stayed clean, but the loneliness gnawed at me. Every night, I went to bed with a heavy heart, wondering if the next day would bring any news. Then, one evening, as I sat on the porch, staring aimlessly into the yard, my phone rang. It was Laura. "David, it's me," she said softly, her voice sounding small and tired. "Laura, where are you? Why did you leave like that?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I needed time to think. I thought some distance would help, but I miss you, David. Emma misses you too. Then come home," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "We can work through this together." She was silent for what felt like an eternity. "I want to, but I'm scared," she finally said. "Scared that things will just go back to how they were." "They won't," I promised, desperation in my voice. "We'll take it one day at a time. Just come home." There was another pause before she spoke. "Okay, we'll come back tomorrow." Relief washed over me, but it was tempered with the realization that this was only the beginning. As I hung up the phone and looked up at the sky, the stars seemed to twinkle a little brighter. The storm hadn't fully passed, but at least now we were facing it together. The next morning, I woke up early, my stomach knotted with nervous energy. Today they were coming home. I busied myself around the house, tidying up, making sure everything was just right for their return. The air seemed charged with a strange blend of anxiety and hope. Around noon, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My heart raced as I hurried to the front door. There they were, Laura and Emma, looking tired but so familiar. Emma spotted me first, her face lighting up with a wide smile. "Daddy!" she shouted, running toward me with open arms. I scooped her up, hugging her tightly. "I missed you so much, Pumpkin," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I missed you too," she whispered, hugging me just as tightly. Laura stood near the car, watching us with a cautious smile. I set Emma down gently and walked over to her. "Hey," I said softly. "Hey," she replied. "It's good to be back." We stood there for a moment, a little awkward, before heading inside. Emma darted off to her room, eager to reunite with her toys. Laura and I found ourselves sitting at the kitchen table, the tension between us heavy but unavoidable. "I'm glad you came back," I said, breaking the silence. Laura nodded. "I realized running away wasn't going to solve anything. We need to face this together." "I agree," I said. "We need to talk about everything, figure out how to move forward." Laura took a deep breath, as though gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what went wrong. I know I made a huge mistake, and I'm so sorry for the hurt I caused." "I know," I said, "but we can't undo the past. All we can do now is try to build a better future." She looked at me, her eyes glistening with tears. "Do you really think we can fix this, David? Do you honestly believe we can?" "I do," I replied, reaching for her hand. "But it's going to take time. We have to put in the effort, both of us. We need to be open, honest, and communicate better than we ever have." Laura squeezed my hand, her expression softening. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes. I want to make this work, for us and for Emma." We spent the next few hours really talking, opening up about our fears, our hopes, and the things that had pushed us apart. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And as painful as it was, it felt like a step toward healing. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. That evening, we sat down for dinner as a family. Emma was full of stories, chattering away about her time at Grandma's, blissfully unaware of the weighty conversation that had taken place earlier. "Daddy, can we go to the park tomorrow?" she asked, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Of course, Pumpkin," I said with a smile. "First thing in the morning." Laura glanced at me with a soft smile of her own. "That sounds lovely. Maybe we can pack a picnic too." "I'd love that," I replied, feeling a warmth spread through me. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't seem so bleak. After dinner, Laura and I tucked Emma into bed together. As we pulled the covers up around her, she looked up at us, her face full of contentment. "I'm glad we're all back together," she said sleepily. "We are too, sweetheart," Laura said, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's forehead. We stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her drift off to sleep. Then, without a word, we headed downstairs and out to the porch. The cool evening air wrapped around us as we sat together, just like we used to. "Do you remember when we used to sit out here all the time?" Laura asked, looking up at the stars. "I do," I said, a faint smile tugging at my lips. "We'd sit here for hours, just talking, enjoying each other's company." Laura sighed softly. "I want to get back to that, David. I want us to be that couple again." "We can be," I said, reaching for her hand again. "It's not going to be easy, but if we both put in the effort, we can find our way back." As we sat there, hand in hand, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time in a while, I truly believed we could make it. We had a lot of work to do, but we had taken the first step, and for now, that was enough. A few months had passed since Laura and Emma had come back home. We were making progress little by little. The wounds were still there, but they were starting to heal. I was hopeful about the future, yet there was a secret weighing heavily on my heart, one I had kept hidden. One evening, after Emma had gone to bed, I sat down in the living room with Laura. She was engrossed in a book, her face peaceful, completely unaware of the storm I was about to bring into our lives. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I had to say would shatter this quiet moment. "Laura, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling just a bit. She looked up at me, concern flickering in her eyes. "What is it, David?" I reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "There's something I've been keeping from you. Something important." Her brow furrowed as she set her book aside. "What are you talking about?" "I haven't been feeling well for a while now," I began, my throat tightening as I forced the words out. "I went to the doctor a few weeks ago, and they ran some tests. Laura, I have an aggressive form of brain cancer." Her face went completely pale, her eyes widening in shock. "What? No, that can't be true." I nodded, my own eyes filling with tears. "It is. The doctors told me it's terminal. I don't have much time left." Laura's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to burden you," I whispered, barely able to keep my voice steady. "After everything we've been through, I didn't want to add to your pain." Shaking her head, Laura's tears streamed down her cheeks. "David, you should have told me. We could have faced this together." "I'm sorry," I said, my voice cracking. "I thought I could handle it on my own, but I was wrong. I need you, Laura. I need you now more than ever." Without hesitation, she pulled me into her arms, her sobs muffled against my shoulder. "We'll get through this," she said through her tears. "We'll fight this together." The next few weeks passed in a blur of doctor appointments, treatments, and emotional conversations. Emma knew something wasn't right, but we tried to keep her world as normal as possible. She was our little ray of sunshine, her joy and innocence giving us the strength to keep going. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch, Emma came and plopped down beside me. She looked up at me with her wide, curious eyes. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked softly. I smiled, ruffling her hair. "I'm fine, Pumpkin. Just thinking." She nodded and rested her head on my shoulder. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, sweetheart," I said, my heart aching with the thought that I wouldn't be there to watch her grow up. That evening, Laura and I tucked Emma into bed together. As we pulled the covers over her, she looked up at us with a sleepy smile. "Daddy, can you read me a story?" she asked, her voice soft and sweet. "Of course," I said, reaching for her favorite book. I read to her until her eyelids grew heavy, and soon enough, she was asleep, her tiny hand still clutching mine. Afterward, Laura and I went downstairs and sat on the porch, letting the cool night air wrap around us. I stared up at the stars, feeling a quiet sense of peace settle over me. "There's something I need to ask you," I said, turning to face Laura. "Anything?" she replied, her eyes full of love and concern. "When the time comes," I began, my voice shaking slightly, "I want you to promise me something. Promise me that you'll move on, that you'll find happiness again." Her eyes filled with tears. "David, I can't even think about that right now. Please," I whispered, my heart heavy. "Promise me you'll find someone who'll love you and Emma the way you deserve to be loved." She nodded, her tears flowing freely. "I promise," she whispered. We sat there in silence, holding each other as tightly as we could. The future felt uncertain, but in that moment, we had each other, and that was enough. The next morning, I woke up feeling weaker than I had in days. Laura insisted we go to the hospital. As we sat in the waiting room, a strange calm washed over me. I knew my time was running out, but I felt at peace. Later that day, as I lay in the hospital bed, with Laura and Emma by my side, a deep sense of love and gratitude filled me. My family had been my greatest gift, and I cherished every moment we had together. "Thank you for everything," I whispered to Laura, my voice faint and weak. She held my hand tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I love you, David. Always." "I love you too," I replied, my eyes growing heavy. "Take care of Emma. Be happy." As I took my final breath, a sense of peace washed over me. I had lived a life filled with love, and now it was time to say goodbye. 6 months had passed since David's death. The days still carried the weight of grief, but life, as it does, had begun to move forward. I could see it in the sound of Emma's laughter and in the way the sun still rose every morning. We were learning to live with our loss, finding small joys in the midst of the sorrow. One bright Saturday morning, I decided it was time for a change. The house, once full of memories, now felt too quiet and empty. I sat down with Emma at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in my hands, her favorite cereal in front of her. "Emma," I began gently, trying to keep my tone upbeat. "How would you feel about us starting fresh? Maybe moving to a new place?" Her eyes grew wide with curiosity. "A new house, Mommy?" "Yes, a new house. Somewhere we can make new memories." Emma thought for a moment, then nodded. "Can we have a garden? I want to plant flowers like Daddy used to." I smiled, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "Of course we can. We'll plant all kinds of flowers." Over the next few weeks, we began looking at houses together. It was bittersweet, but focusing on something new felt like a positive step. Then, one day we found it. A cozy house with a big backyard, perfect for the garden Emma wanted. Felt right, like the place where we could truly start over. Moving day came quicker than I expected. Friends and family came to help us pack, and soon we were standing in our new living room, surrounded by boxes. Emma was already running through the house, exploring every corner, her laughter echoing through the halls. "Mommy, come see my room," she called out excitedly. I followed her upstairs, smiling at her enthusiasm. Her new room was bright and cheerful, with a large window that let in plenty of light. Emma had already decided where she wanted to put all her toys and books. "Do you like it?" I asked, watching her face light up. She nodded eagerly. "I love it. It's perfect." That night, after Emma had drifted off to sleep, I sat out on the porch, looking up at the stars. A mix of emotions swirled inside me. Sadness, relief, and hope. David's absence was a constant ache, but I knew he would be proud of us for finding the strength to move forward. As I sat there, lost in thought, I noticed someone walking toward the house. It was our new neighbor, a kind-looking man around my age, with warm eyes and a friendly smile. "Hi there," he said, offering his hand. "I'm Chris. Welcome to the neighborhood." "Thank you," I replied, shaking his hand. "I'm Laura. It's nice to meet you." We talked for a while, and I learned that Chris had 2 kids around Emma's age. He offered to introduce us to some of the other families on the street, and I felt a sense of relief. Maybe this fresh start wouldn't be as hard as I'd feared. The next day, Chris and his kids came over to help us settle in. Emma quickly made friends with them, and before long they were running around the backyard, laughing and playing. It was a beautiful sight, one that filled me with a quiet sense of hope. As the weeks went by, we began to settle into a new routine. Emma started at her new school, making friends easily, and I found purpose in volunteering at the community center. Life was different, but it was good. We were adjusting, and little by little, we were healing. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Emma looked up at me with a thoughtful expression on her face. "Mommy, do you think Daddy can see us? Do you think he's happy?" I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "I think Daddy is always with us, in our hearts, and I believe he's happy to see us finding joy again." Emma smiled, her eyes twinkling with the innocence only a child can have. "I think so too." That night, as I tucked Emma into bed, she wrapped her arms around me and held on tight. "I love you, Mommy," she said softly. "I love you too, sweetheart," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "More than anything." As I turned off the light and quietly closed her door, a sense of peace settled over me. The journey had been difficult, and there were still challenges ahead, but we were moving forward. We were finding our way one step at a time. In that moment, I knew David's wish for us was coming true. We were healing, we were growing, and we were creating a new life filled with love and hope. It was a new beginning, and it was beautiful.